And we are recording now. I'll give it probably till about 4 after before we get started, just in case other people show up. I know that, like I said, Betsy was going to call in um, at the very least, so we'll wait to see if she's able to join. Really? Huh. It might have been because it just wasn't in front of my face. Um, Curious to how I'm sounding now. Well, I think I'm going to go ahead and get started since we're recording it and we want to get done, and then whenever other folks join, then they'll be able to catch up, or we can restart because we're recording it, and like I said, we can edit it. So this is the Winchester Water Control Board Action Review. The point of this review is to go through 3 sets of data. The first set is just that. It's going to be data and information that we can confirm, and it's in regards to questions that were asked of us. Excuse me one second. Asked of us during our canvassing activity. In fact, I want to take just one step back real fast. I want to say that when it comes to the Winchester Dam, the population that has been overlooked and is suffering the consequences, again, this is me, Andrew, not necessarily Democratic Party, is the homeowners down on the water or members of the district. And the reason for that is because they're caught in the middle between their board and the state, and then some of the environmental groups. A lot of them have no idea or no control of what's going on. And that's why we originally took the tactic of going out and talking to those folks and trying to really understand what it is that they're seeing and the concerns that they have. So we did some canvassing activity a few weeks ago, probably about a month ago, to just do just that. Really talk to the folks there on the ground and find out what their concerns, questions, and the information they had was. So the first part of this briefing is going to be just that. It's going to be the answer to those questions that were put to us as we were out there doing our canvassing activity. So as we go through this presentation, it is broke up into 3 basic agenda or sections. The first section is going to be the facts and data review. It is just exactly what it says. We were able to gather some documents, and this is just the information from those documents pulled out to answer certain questions. Now, we went a little bit further, and when I say we, I'll say me. I went a little bit further, and whenever I was looking at those documents, there's a certain few little things that kind of caught my attention because of my experience in contracting and in leading very complex programs, which this was not, to be clear. So the second section is going to be kind of my community audit, where I took that information and then I do a little bit deeper dive into it than just revealing the facts and data. One thing that's important to note is that whenever we take that little bit deeper dive, it is a lot of conjecture, in my opinion, and a lot of questions that I would ask if I was performing an audit, because there's a lot of open questions. So, and then after that, we'll talk about next steps and what you could do if you were a member of that water control board and you really were concerned and wanted to address this and get out in front of it. So, with that said, we'll go ahead and we'll step into the first section, which is going to be the facts and data. So facts and data. This is you'll notice as we go through this presentation, you'll see a lot of these cutouts. These cutouts are snippets from the actual information, the documents that we were able to obtain. So we're not making anything up. We're not putting information out there that isn't already written and that has already been adjudicated. We are using the actual documents from the control board and from some of the engineering firms, and then also from some of the legal cases that are pending. So this is directly out of the financial statement from June 2023 of the Winchester Water Control District. And the reason why I snipped this is because it really shows exactly what the point of the Water Control District is. And that is, it's a special district with a 9-person governing board that was formed in 1969. The district is comprised of 120 properties that line the banks of the North Umpqua River near the Winchester Dam. It's a little bit misconstrued because not all of the homes in the district actually sit on the water. So that's just one clarification. The purpose of the district is to maintain the Winchester Dam and the fish ladder, and that is it. There's no other purpose other than to maintain the Winchester Dam and the fish ladder, which begs the question, have they been maintaining the dam and maintaining the fish ladder? We'll get to that. So I also want to talk about the documents that we're actually going to review as we go through this, just so everybody can go and find those documents themselves and do their own review. And that's really the point, and really what we're trying to get people to do is to kind of understand that maybe some things have happened that you're not completely in agreement with, and if it has, that you have options. So the documents that we're going to look at specifically as we go through here is the annual financial report prepared by the board and submitted to the state. And we pull those through public records requests from 2022 through 2024. We're also going to look at, or reference, I should say, not look at, engineering reports. The two that I want to look or reference specifically are both from 2024, and they're both after the repairs were done in 2023, and they talk about maybe the contractor didn't follow the work instructions exactly, and this is how they recover from not following the work instructions. There's also court orders. This court order is a consent order, and the consent order, we'll look at that pretty thoroughly. It talks about some of the facts and data that have already come out, so it's a good reference point. Now, for those that are kind of data nerds like I am, the first thing I do whenever I do any type of audit or inspection or kind of review is I want to actually see when things occurred and when things happen. And as you start to lay it out on a timeline, you can see just where some things kind of don't make a whole lot of sense. For instance, if we look at the dam inspection, now this is the state, so I wouldn't say the state's completely innocent in all this. They did the 2020 inspection in March, and then they did the 2021 inspection in September. So right back to back. Let me be clear, that's not when the inspections were performed, that's when the reports were released. But it seemed to be that the reports were released about 30 days after the inspection. So no inspections for 2022. Next inspection is for 2022 is in 2023, and then there's a revision that happened right after that, and we'll look at some of that. And I think my chart got cut off, but the 2024 inspection happened in 2023 as well. So let me see if I can scroll down. Oh yeah, there you go. 2023, again, right at the end of 2023, and then 2024 at the end of 2024. So, very good. So this next chart is just a summary of the financial reports from 2022 through 2024. This is just data that was extrapolated straight from those financial reports. And this is kind of where I started looking at, hey, there's some very obvious things that just stick out like a sore thumb. And those are the ones that you want to go look at, right? Because how does this happen or why? So just a real quick review of this. You can see that the assessments were about 400,000 in 2022 and then 430 in 2024, but for whatever reason in 2023 it was only about 200,000. I don't know. Again, it just kind of looks funny. That's where if I was a homeowner Those are the type of questions I would ask, right? What is this and why is this here? Also for the bonds, there was a 3 million bond that was approved by the members of the district, and that bond was for 300 million or for 3 million. So the one thing that I didn't understand about bonds until I started looking into this process is that a bond is essentially a loan. So the members go and they get a bond through a bank, and that's worth 3 million, and they just draw that down as it's needed, and then they pay that back with assessments over time. So what's important is that they got a $3 million bond, and then they drew it down completely by the end of 2024. So it's completely drawn down, and there's no more money there. There's only time to repay. There was some interest that was added to the account because they had carried a balance. So you can see your total 3-year total for the money that was brought in by the board was 4 million and a little bit of change. So if we move on to disbursements, this is where it gets, a little more interesting just looking at the progression. So for the accounting fees, it was about 2,400 in 2022, 4,000 in 2023. That doesn't seem out of sorts or ridiculous to me. But then all of a sudden in 2024, it jumped up to 10,500. There's really no explanation given for this throughout the documents that we reviewed, but it is something of note and kind of funny. Again, just different. The next line is even more, I don't want to call it suspicious, but it's eye-catching, and that's the dues and fees. And this is the language that the board used when preparing the financial reports, just to be clear. So in 2022, there was duties and fees of roughly $2,000, just under. And then in 2023, suddenly that jumped up to almost 15,000, no explanation really given. And then in 2024, it drops down to 5,000 again. I don't know what that 2023 payment is. As we go through some of the audit questions here in a little bit, you'll see that there is a payment that was made for recoupment to a contractor from 2018 that was somewhere in the range of 14 to 19,000, but it certainly doesn't match up with this 14,000 here. So, and that payment's not listed anywhere else on this financial report. So I'm not exactly sure where that is or how that distribution happened, but we'll discuss that more in detail here in just a few minutes. Next, we look at the insurance. The insurance line, again, it was roughly $1,500 in 2022, jumped up to about $35 in 2023, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, 2024, it's $110,000. I'm not quick enough to tell you what multiple that is, but it's it's in excess, right? That's a huge jump. Again, there may be logical, reasonable explanations for that. I think it may be the risk around the court cases, but that data has not arrived. A lot of times whenever you hear me talk about this, is just a side note, the data hasn't arrived or we're unsure at this time. That's because we've put in a bunch of public information requests to try to get that data. It is public information. We will get it eventually, but there's maneuvers and there's a back and forth that has to happen before we get it. I wouldn't even say that the board is trying to not get us the information. They're proceeding as they should. So give credit to when it is due. So very good. Moving on, legal fees is the next line, and the legal fees are kind of interesting, and we'll talk in more detail during the audit of why that's interesting. But you can see here, it's roughly about $500,000, 50,000 short of $500,000 over the last 3 years, which, if your charge is only to maintain the dam and the fish ladder and you have $500,000 of legal fees, again, if I was a homeowner, type of things I'd question. Why? Office supplies, there's really nothing of note there. Fish supplies, nothing of note there. They do have a requirement to update their emergency action plan because there hasn't been one. I think it's in work now, and they did set aside some budget for that, but they didn't claim any distributions against that particular line on it. So very good. Now, if we move into debt, it's important that whenever we talk about the debt, this is debt servicing. They have $3 million of debt, or you all have $3 million of debt. That's noted on this report, although there may be other debt. I am unsure from what we have. The only thing we can confirm is that 3 million. So to service that debt, it was roughly about 40,000 in 2022, about 80, 90,000 in 2023, and then 110 in 2024. And again, that's because $3 million loan, you have to, pay principal and service it, pay the interest on it. And as you can see, the interest payments are down there below for the difference. So excuse me, I made a mistake just a second ago. That is the principal line, and then the interest line is below. Again, important to note, $45,000 just in interest this year, and that's going to continue on until that principal is paid down. So for as far as outlays, the outlays are a little bit different. These are really what was set aside to do the repairs to the dam in 2023. As you can see, there's still quite a bit there in 2024, and we'll talk about why it kind of came out that way. So again, 200,000 in 2022, about 300,000 in 2023, and then 2.1 million 2024. So total disbursements over the last 3 years is about 3.5 million. Again, you had about 4 million in income, which leaves you roughly a half a million in the bank account as of today. That was a lot of information. Any questions before we move off this slide?
Well, I just want to make a point, and I see that, Virginia made a comment that in the chat, and I don't know if that translates to the recording as far as being available to the public. But one of them I can respond to. She said it's a good thing about the public records. I think that people really need to understand that Winchester Water Control District is a public entity. And one of the glaring messages at the meeting that, they took over and we didn't have the public meeting is their misconception that there's something other than a public entity. And that's one of the reasons why we are able to ask for and should get, unless they're exempt under Oregon law, anything we ask to in regard to records of the district. And I don't know if Virginia wants to make her comment.
Yes, please do, because I don't know if I can see the chat screen as I'm presenting.
My comments so far was, I thought it was good that you mentioned that you had requested public information. And yes, Betsy's comment is important too, that people realize the information is public.
Yep, very good.
But I made another comment because when I reviewed the water resources dam inspection reports, it said that there was an emergency action plan, but there was a request that they needed to basically what they are is it's just a phone tree of emergency personnel doing specific things. But it has been written down. That's what I got from the state's inspection report.
Yeah, now that you say that, I agree with you. There was some work done to do the report, but now they need to actually exercise the report and go out and do it. Correct. Yep. Thank you for that. Yep. Very good. So the next few slides are going to be, again, the specific questions that were asked of us, and I'll answer those to the best of my ability. And we most likely have probably already talked about it on the summary slide. That's where I like to do most of my kind of showing where those questions raise. So the first question is, what are the contractor's costs? And then what was terra firma's cost? So far, if we look at the engineering and design line, you can refer back to it, it's been about 2.677 million in design and permitting costs. Now, it's interesting that they label that as design and permitting and not installation, and there is no line item for installation. So we don't really know what terra firma contract is worth. We can maybe assume that 2.6 includes their cost, but because it's not specifically stated, that is an assumption. Now, of that 2.6, if we look at the Dow contract was for right around $1 million. Again, with that, we can make some assumptions and say, okay, well, if engineering was $1 million, then obviously the installation was 1.5. I'd be a little careful with that because you don't know exactly what they're lumping in with that engineering design. Also, there was another engineering firm that was exercised, and they designed the tie down straps or the tie down oh man, what am I going to call them? They're retaining structure to the framework, and their costs weren't necessarily pointed out either. So I'm not really sure how much those contracts are worth or exactly how much terra firma was paid. Now, in the audit section, we'll make some assumptions and then we'll start talking about what they could have been paid and what they could have not been paid. The only thing, and this is the facts and data section, the only thing that we know for sure is that in their financial report, they said that their contract would be limited to $3 million. So whatever that means is what it means. What are the lawyer fees? Again, we already talked about this. It's been about $500,000 in lawyer fees, 40,000 less ish. And I'm not sure if that includes a reimbursement payment that went to a previous contractor from a 2018 repair. Again, when we're looking at the summary, there's that one little line where it says dues and fees, and then that one was, I think 12,000, 14,000. So I'm not sure if that reimbursement was covered under that, or if that was covered under the legal fees, and they didn't state in particular. There's a lot of things that weren't real clear, as you'll notice as we go through here. Again, what was the insurance cost? Why has it gone up? I'm not really sure why it went up again, but it is 110 for the last year. Is it going to continue in being hundreds of thousands, or is it going to go back down to being, a few thousand? Because there's no information in any of the data that we were given or received about the insurance and why, there's no real determination that can be made there. I would tend to think that it's going to continue to be high because I kind of make the assumption, again, an assumption that the risk that the insurance company is using to elevate that premium is probably around the court. That would be my assumption. And again, your interest payments, they were 6,000, then 3,000, and now they're all the way up to 45,000, and that's just interest to service your debt. Divide that by 120, and you know exactly how much your household is paying. But I shouldn't say that because I'm not sure if it's a graduated system or per household system that they do their levies against. So what are the current fines and fees and expenditures? Again, how much was the reimbursement to the contractor in 2018 and what were the legal fees? So according to the 2022 financial statement, the fines were 12,000. Then in 2023, again, they went up to 19,000, and there was no real reason or justification as to why there was suddenly was a $7,000 increase from one year to the other. If it was a court case that was already settled, then the fine should have already been known. So again, just one of those things that, from an auditor's perspective, you think, that's weird. Maybe I need to dig into that. So is the WWCD paying all contractors legal fees, fines, essentially relieving them of any liability? We'll talk about this a little bit more in the audit section, but the true answer in the facts and data is maybe. I don't know. It's really hard to tell. If you look through the financial statements, it does appear that they're paying their legal fees, and any fines or court cases, anything that comes at them, it seems like the board is choosing to go ahead and pay those for the contractor, which is not normal business. But they may have an agreement. There is a such thing. Well, I'll save it for the audit section. But there you have the data. So how did you get here? How did we get to this point where all this money is being spent and there's still all kinds of questions? Well, basically, in the 2023 repair, terra firma, which is owned or at least operated by the president of the board, actually bid on doing the work, and they won. So they ended up doing that work, which creates some tough situations, especially if the contractor doesn't perform to their contract. So the first barrier, though, whenever you do something like that, where you essentially have a member of the organization provide services to the organization, is usually you have to do some sort of sole source justification, because that's the only way they could be hired if they were sole source. So most government contracts, and I'm not sure about this, so I just want to be clear about that. Most government contracts do require you to compete those contracts to ensure that you're getting a fair bid whenever it comes back, especially if you're going to hire from somebody from within the organization to do that work, right? You want to at least have some, sanity checks of this is also how much it would cost for somebody else to do it. So did they do that? Did they compete the contract before awarding it to terra firma? And the answer to that is yes. According to the 2023 annual financial report, an advertisement was placed in the News Review and several trade publications. We currently have an open publics request, a records request to actually see those advertisements or the payment to the News Review or anything that shows that these actually went out. Now, even if they did go out, does that meet the standard of actually competing a contract to do just an advertisement in the News Review? And it's not even very, you can see right here, so it's select online trade publications. I'm not sure what that means, but we are digging into it, because that would be the first hurdle from my experience of if this is even a valid contract, is did they compete it? And if they did compete it and it was sole source to terra firma, who works on the board, then there would need to be that kind of sole source justification, again, in my mind. So now that they hired terra firma to do the work, were the work instructions followed? No, they weren't. And we'll see that as we go through some of those court documents where it's clear that work instructions were given from the engineering firm, and then terra firma didn't follow them. And that is the exact reason why you have these rules and regulations about hiring a company within your own organization, because now, how do you get relief from a contractor who is also on your board? And that's the tough spot that I think you all in the water control district are in right now. So, as well as that, there's a bunch of ongoing litigation. To be completely clear, there's 5 court cases that we know of that are happening over the next few years, a lot of them this year, to be exact. So there is a federal lawsuit that was filed by Water Watch to remove the dam, and that's in federal court, and that is scheduled to start on April 21st, 2025. We'll see what the outcome of that is. There's also an Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. They issued a $126,000 fine for alleged permit violations during the 2023 repair, and that also has a trial set for early April of 2025. The Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife filed an action for alleged harm to the lamprey. This is the one that most people know about. There was a fine that was assessed of $27.5, that of course was challenged in court. The courts have labeled this complex litigation. I don't know what that means exactly, other than it's going to be a while before it gets to the trial date. The fourth lawsuit is through Oregon Water Resources Department, which regulates dam safety. I'm just going to paraphrase this one. Basically, in '92, they got the okay to impound just so much water. Turns out they're impounding more water than or the dam is impounding more water than it should. And whenever they went to say, hey, can we redo that registration so we can impound the amount of water that we do have? They said no, so now there's a lawsuit. And that trial hasn't been set yet, but it's likely to happen in 2025. And the last one, and this is a big one, is that I'm going to paraphrase, everybody can read this at their own convenience, but basically, whenever they started doing this work in 2023, it was under the assumption that it falls under as repair or regular maintenance, but not construction. And that is what's being challenged, is whether or not this was a repair or whether or not this was construction. On one side, they say they completely replaced the crib and they completely redid all of the tie downs. That's construction, pretty simple. Whereas the other side says, no, we didn't mess with any of the fill material, so it wasn't. What's important is that if the state deems that this was construction, which, again, my opinion, we'll talk about in the audit, I do have a strong opinion that it probably was construction, then there is also a requirement that you do the fish ladder at the same time, upgrade it, fish passage, and that's what the state ordered, that because this was construction, the fish passage also needs to be updated and redone to fall within the new standards. And that court case will be proceeding. This may become complicated, and as far as I know, there's not a trial date set. So that's the end of the facts and data section. Any questions before we move on?
I don't know if you have an answer to this, but why do they want to store more water?
I don't have an answer to that. You're right. But I'll make a judgment. I don't think the plan was to store more water. I just think that whenever they built the dam too high and the gates too low. So it just naturally ended up that way. But I don't really have an answer. That's conjecture. Okay, moving on to the next section. So this was, we're going to be, and hopefully with the recording, some of the folks down there in the Water Control District will see this, a best case scenario. Now, this isn't necessarily what I want, just to be full disclosure, open kimono, as they say. But I do think that if we're going to look at those homeowners and say, they're the ones being squeezed. If I was a homeowner, what do I think the best case scenario for myself would be? Excuse me, my puppy. And I do think there may be an opportunity to win recoupment on some of those contracts that seem maybe like they didn't meet the standard of what a contract was. And we'll talk about that in the audit section a little bit deeper. I do think that maybe there's an opportunity to negotiate with the state, maybe the county, to rebuild the dam, as long as it addressed like the three major areas of the folks that are concerned. And one being a new fish ladder or passage that has to be, up to standards and actually work and actually get the fish through. But I think if you did that, some of the environmental groups may be willing to work with you. Again, this is just my perspective. I also think that one of the biggest heartache for the people that live around here is that there's no public access, and it seems to be private control of a public waterway. So you would have to somehow open it up for the public to be able to use in some sort of way. Now, I think that you would also have to do that to secure the funding to rebuild the dam, because if you're going to use state money, then now it's a state project. Or if you're going to use county money, now it's a county project. So therefore, there would have to be some use for the public to obtain that funding. Also, the rebuild would need to happen to lessen the water retention and get it to the right area. So again, this is the art of the possible. This isn't something that I think is easily achievable, if achievable at all. It is just what I would try to strive for if I was a homeowner. I do think there may be an opportunity to remove some of those fines if you can negotiate with the state and say, hey, we recognize that there was issues, and we recognize that most of those issues were caused by our contractor, not necessarily the homeowner. So let's put the fine where the fine resides. Who did the action get the punishment. There would also need to be an agreement to a new maintenance and inspection schedule, of course. And then if you're adding a park, boat ramp, whatever, that would also have to be maintained and upkept. And I could see that as the responsibility of the district. And then, and this is probably the biggest thing, is that if the funding was to come from other entities, you would have to give them some decision-making power. Now, with all of that said, I don't think this is necessarily a realistic outcome because of the amount of funds that it would take to rebuild the dam, but it's a good starting point for saying what if and is this possible. So yeah, And with that, I know some of the folks on the phone may not agree with all this, so let's hear some other perspectives. Oh, I don't hear any other perspectives. Maybe they do think this is possible, or at least they like my explanation that, pie in the sky.
Oh no, I just had to, wake up and put my headphone on. No. So I don't know that that's a general consensus even among the Democratic Party. The resolution that we passed in 2023, when the fiasco of the most recent repair was in the process, a couple of things that we, ultimately says, make them comply with what they need to comply with. Excuse me. Personally, one of my concerns, which really brought my attention as a member of the Democratic Party to bring it forward there, was a state law that says there's three primary purposes that a dam, can exist. And Winchester Water Control District, their dam does not. So the Winchester Dam is not one of those primary purposes. Yeah, and although recreation is listed as a secondary use, so I still think that that's an issue that the state needs to look at, because are they really allowing something to even maintain an illegal dam? Is the dam really lawful under the state under the rules? And because they never, from what I understand, never actually did any of the things that are required. Was it even ever properly allowed to happen? So I think that I think that everything needs to be on the table. So I'm not saying that providing this information is an option. Certainly everything can be considered, but I think that if that fundamental issue is addressed, that they really have no right to a dam. And that's really where I come from, is getting a really clear answer. And if the state says yes, it needs to be an answer yes, then yes, because we said so, you know.
Yeah, I
Um,
understand.
but also there's also, the other thing, is it really feasible? And what, you're looking at, are the homeowners, going to lose anything if the dam comes down financially? And it seems that the indication is that they would not, that this would not harm their property value. So then what is the reason? And I'm going to say, just recently I started thinking about that, what the water level and what is the public access. So, the public access to anything on our public waterway needs to be actually accessible. And it really doesn't seem there's any way the public can readily, use the water where what is created, what they call the lake. So that's just my opinion too. I'm not speaking on behalf of the party either.
Yep, very good. Thank you for that input. Okay, so with that, I think we'll move into the audit. Again, whenever we're talking about the audit, this is based on my work experience in kind of well, just my experience. So let's talk about that real fast. I did include my resume in the backup just so people could look at it at their leisure if they would like. So I was in the military for 21 years. In the Air Force, where I filled a bunch of different jobs. I was an engine mechanic, and then as you progress up through the ranks, that job becomes more broad and becomes more logistics, and then it becomes more of managing troops. So after my military career, I did obtain my technical management degree with a concentration in project management, and then I was able to get my project management certification through the Project Management Institute. For those who aren't familiar, that's commonly known as a $100,000 certification, because if you get it, you can get hired as a project manager at big corporations and you will be paid at least $100,000. So it's a great thing to have. Started working for Boeing, worked for Boeing. I started out as a program manager for their AWACS. And on that, I was on the contracting side and in the development side. So what I mean by that is the customer would come to us and say, we want a jet with XYZ requirements. And then we would have to take those requirements, distill them out to the different engineering teams, get the information back, send it to the architect. The architect would build it together. And then we would price all that out, put it in a schedule, level load that schedule with all the time and material, figure out how long it's going to take, figure out how much it's going to cost, put in our profit, figure out the contract type, run it through legal, and then Then we would take it to our executives, show them the package, the executives would approve it, and then we would present it to whoever sent in the initial, this is the Death Star that we want to build. That even got more complicated as you added classified pieces, and a lot of times, we would have to go to the Pentagon or to Congress and get approval to even put some of these systems on other systems. So if anybody's familiar with system engineering, we use a lot of system engineering, which is basically, you're looking at your hydro guys, and you're looking at your electric guys, and you're looking at your loads, and you're looking at your, controls, and all those interfaces where all those systems touch each other. That's system engineering. So it's a very much a high level, 30,000 foot looking down to see, will this work? Will this project actually be successful on time, on cost, and on budget? So just to give you a slight indication, if it wasn't above $50 million, we didn't even look at it. That was our starting point. And many of my contracts were several billion. So with that, look at my resume. I think I do have a pretty good background in understanding of contract law and engineering and integration. And that's what I'm going to draw on as we go through this audit. So the first thing that really caught my eye whenever I started working through this is these two statements here. And these are the statements that basically say that a contractor lost a lawsuit from a 2018 repair, and that for whatever reason, the Winchester Water Control Board decided they were going to pay him back. Now, the thing that really got me is if you look at the difference between the years, it does go from 12,000 to 19,000, and there's no explanation of it. Like, if there was a court case that was settled and there was a fine that was levied, why would it go up? So that would be the question that I asked. Here's number two. Number two, this is because the contractor made a mistake. The contractor was fined, not the board, not the district, the contractor, and then the board decided after the fact to reimburse them for that fine. Now, I just don't understand that. If I hired a contractor and they burnt down the forest and then they were fined for it, I wouldn't come back and then pay that fine for them. There is certain contractual language, and Betsy, you're going to have to help me out, where you completely admonish the contractor of any responsibility. What is that called? As she's finding her headphone, I'll move on. But there is a go ahead.
And what you're talking about, indemnification.
Yes, identification. Now, that's used very, very rarely in law because it completely removes the liability from the contractor, and that's something that you just kind of never want to do, except under really strange contractors or under circumstances. So here's the next thing that caught my eye. There is a basic legal hurdle that has to be, I'm not a lawyer, just experience, right? But there's a basic legal hurdle that has to be met for any contract to even be considered a lawful agreement. And one of those is called consideration. And what consideration means is that party A and party B both get something of value for that contract to pass that first legal hurdle. My question is if you're a homeowner in this district and you paid, you're the customer because you're the one paying the bill, and then you pay your contractor's legal fees, what did you receive in return? What did you receive of the value from this contract and paying this contractor's legal fees, and then reimburse them? I don't know. Maybe there's a reason for it, but from the information we have, I can't figure it out. Here's the point. Here's the thing that you have at your fingertips, though, is that you've been paying a lawyer for the past 3 years, almost $500,000, who should be able to answer these types of questions. Now, may there be some sort of, I don't want to use a legal term of where two entities are fighting over each other. Oh, Betsy, it's killing me. Conflict of interest. I don't want to say that there's a legal conflict of interest, but there is certainly a perceived conflict of interest. And if this lawyer is also doing the work for terra firma or any of the other contractors on their behalf, that is certainly a ethical conflict of interest that should be acted upon. If I was a member of this district, or if I owned one of those houses, you can sure bet that I'd be calling this lawyer and ask, hey, who do you actually work for? Who's paying your bills? And have we actually looked at the contractor as a possible culprit in why some of this has gone awry, and therefore they should hold some of the liability. So that was a lot. Any questions on any of that?
No question, but I thought you did an excellent job of explaining why there's a problem with them paying the legal fees for a mistake that the contractor made.
Yep.
That was
Yep.
very good explanation.
Very good. Yeah, and there's a little more of that. And all these laws were put into place, or even best practices or whatever, because self-dealing. I'll just call it like that. So, all right. So now we're going to start talking a little bit about contract types. This is going to sound a little academic, so I apologize up front, but we'll get it through it quickly. So there are 3 common contract types that are regularly used. Those are cost plus, firm fix, and a not to exceed. A firm fixed contract is what most people think of whenever they do a contract. I have some plumbing work that needs to be done. Somebody comes out, he says it's going to be $300. They do the work, I pay them the $300, and they go on their way. Now, the risk and the liability of a fixed firm contract lies on the contractor. And what I mean by that is, once that person quotes me the $300, if it ends up costing them $600, they eat the $300. If it only costs them $50, then they have $250 in profit. So all of the risk lies with the contractor if things go awry. Now, cost plus is a little bit different. Cost plus puts the risk on the contractee or the customer, we'll say. And the way this works is, same situation. I have some plumbing work. The contractor comes out, the plumber, he looks at it, he says, I don't know. I think this is going to take me 5 hours, but I'm going to charge you on an hourly basis because I'm not really sure. That's a cost plus contract. I'm going to pay him for his time, his material, or she, and then I'm also going to pay a fee on top of that, and that's their profit. Now, the reason why the risk falls on the customer in this situation is, what happens if that contractor, cuts through a main water line or completely, destroys the sink, whatever it is, because I'm only paying his time and material, him or her. Now I'm responsible for that extra work. Now, because cost plus contracts can be risky for the customer, because the contractor could add work, could gold plate, could do some work wrong just to ensure that they have more work, and then they get profit on that. So there really is a responsibility on the contractor in cost plus contracts to follow the work instructions, because the risk is on the people paying the bill, which is not the contractor. And the risk of messing up is on the people paying the bill, the customer, not the contractor. So it's very important, cost plus contracts, that the contractor is held responsible whenever they don't follow what the engineers tell them to do. So one more, not to exceed. So not to exceed is kind of a bolt-on that usually goes to one of these other type of contracts. And what not to exceed means is that, we have $3 million that we can spend on this project. So you can't go over that, no matter what. You can't go over that 3 million. Now, whenever we get to that threshold of 3 million, that's when the real decision point happens, because they should have been a negotiation beforehand about whether the contractor or the contractee is responsible for that work. A lot of times what we would do at Boeing was we would get to that not to exceed, and then we would say, okay, you're still going to pay us time and material, but there's no profit on anything we do after that, or vice versa. So that's kind of where the responsibility is shared. So looking at what terra firma put, or what the board put in their financial reports, you can see it seems to be a cost plus fixed fee not to exceed contract. That's what I'm going to assume going through the rest of this audit. And the reason why I think that is just, if you read through it, it says that, there was no bids received. Terra firma was the only one selected. The contract amount cannot exceed the revenue bond. So because it says it cannot exceed, I'm assuming they're getting paid, time and material up until that point. I will note that, for whatever reason, between the 2 years, 2023 and 2024, they went ahead and dropped that $3 million out of the language. Almost like they don't want people to know exactly what's going on. I don't know. It's crazy. So again, as we move forward, we're going to assume cost plus fixed fee, not to exceed a $3 million. We kind of already talked about some of the inherent risk with the cost plus. That is, if the contractor doesn't follow the work instructions, they can create work and profit for themselves. And then we'll talk about, did terra firma follow the work instructions? According to the financial report, you can see right there, they said all structural upgrades were installed per design with little or none, with no unforeseen challenges. But just a few paragraphs below there, and you can start to see that might not have completely been true. Essentially, in this paragraph, I'm going to paraphrase. They start talking about how they couldn't necessarily test the anchors as they wanted for several different reasons, or they list different reasons on different forms. In this form, they talk about how they couldn't do it because there was no structure to attach onto to actually do that pooling, because that was the design. And we'll talk about the design a little bit later in the presentation. The point here is just to say that they're saying that they did it, and then 2 paragraphs later, they're saying that they didn't do it. They're saying that they didn't do it here because of the design, and then you'll notice on slide 19, they'll say that they didn't do it because they ran out of schedule and they had to re-water the dam. Now, if it was a schedule thing, that's the contractor's liability. As a program manager, you should know an hour into the project if you're behind schedule or ahead of schedule. It's literally the purpose of the job. So if they ran out of schedule, they weren't managing the job or the schedule correctly, and that is the contractor's responsibility. If they couldn't pool test because they got to that point where it was time to do the pool test, and that's when they realized, oh, wow, we don't have any of the material, we don't have the structure, we don't have the underpinning, we can't do this. That is also the contractor's responsibility, in my opinion, because the contractor should have reviewed all of the work construction and verified that they can actually do the work before starting the work, especially if you have to drain a lake. Just put that out there. Any questions? So the next 3 slides, we're going to talk about the stipulated facts that were drawn, and this is exactly from the consent order. So these are snippets of the consent order, and then my comments to what's in there, because this is what the board agreed to as facts when they signed off on this consent order. So no comments here. It just basically describes what the dam is, where it's at, and the modification that happened. Now, here's where it gets fun. If we go to 1.5, you can see terra firma says they did not do the pool test. They didn't do the proof testing. And because they didn't do the proof testing, 1.6, Dow, the engineer of record, said, we can't sign off that this job is actually complete the design. You didn't follow the work instruction. You didn't do the design, so we're not going to sign off on it. But then what happens? Well, that means that they have to come up with a new type of test to ensure that the design is actually going to hold. And that test was a continuous monitoring, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Interesting enough, if you look at 1.8 through 1.10, you'll see that the state reached out to the board several times to say, hey, there's an issue here. we need to fix it. We need to figure out what's going on. And the board just didn't respond. And that eventually led to this consent order. Again, that's more legal cost that is given to the homeowners of this district simply because the board didn't do what they were elected to do. And there is a ton of cost from the moment that terra firma didn't do the full test, admittedly, did not do the full test as it was written. From that point on, because it's a cost plus contract and they didn't follow the work instruction, if I was a homeowner, I would say, hey, we shouldn't be paying and we shouldn't be liable for any work done from that period forward because that was their mistake for not following the engineer. The next thing you'll see as we look at the consent order, 1.12 and 1.13, you can assume that this monitoring that was done or in this extra inspection that needs to be done wasn't going to be required if the contractor would have just followed the work instructions, but they didn't. So this is more excess cost to the homeowners who are already $3 million in debt because your contractor didn't follow the work instructions. This is from the September 2024, and this was a response that was given from Strata, one of the engineering design firms, to the state when they were asking questions about why didn't they test these and what's the new plan going to be moving forward. What I want to point out in this particular paragraph isn't necessarily the engineering. It's the fact that they're saying that this monitoring wouldn't have been required if not for the contractor not following the work instructions. And it's several times it's alluded to, admitted to, and just plainly stated. And again, so this is an interesting, this was actually I meant to keep in backup, so forgive me. As we get done with this briefing, I'll go ahead and do it now. There is several backup slides that are questions that I have around the engineering, specifically in the structure of the dam. I didn't include this in this upfront briefing because I wanted to make sure we had time to get through just what the homeowners would want to be concerned with, or what I think they should be concerned with. If there's time and if there's a willingness, we can also go through those backup slides and look at some of the engineering questions. But since this is up, I'll go ahead and talk about it. So if you read through this, what it's saying is that the new crib that was installed is meant to be intermediately loaded. As the old structure breaks down behind the steel structure, it will then transfer that load to the new steel structure. There's an assumption in here that loading is going to be intermittent, which means, it's going to break one at a time over time. I also believe that it's possible that could be a cascading failure, where the first one breaks and then the second one and then 3 and 4 and then 5 and then they all go at the same time, which would then mean that that's an instantaneous loading over an intermittent loading. Now, does that mean anything at all whenever it comes to the actual safety rating? I don't know. It's one of those questions that, as an integrator that looks at those those integration points, I would have asked, what if we're wrong about this assumption? Just a quick note on assumptions. Assumptions are unknowns, which is pretty easy to say, but usually assumptions will then be delineated through system engineering into one of two categories, and that would either be a risk or an opportunity. So all unknowns are risk, but if you go ahead and assume that the unknown is a negative unknown and it will be negative, then that could make it an opportunity, because if you can deal with it, now you can do away with the excess cost or the excess engineering needed for that risk. So you'll see several points where the engineers talk about assumptions. The more assumptions you have, the more unknowns you have. The more unknowns you have, the more risky something is. Pretty easy. So that was basically all I wanted to go through for the homeowners, to kind of show where terra firma didn't follow work instructions, and you may be able to recoup some of that money. Also, again, May, talk to your lawyer. Also, with the payment to the contractor for the 2018 fines, there was, I don't see what the homeowners got in return. So I don't think that that was a fair contract, and there may be something you can get in return. So some of the other records that I'm looking for, and I'll do an update to this audit as these things come in, because I want to make sure that if I got something wrong, I correct it, and maybe new questions will come up. So some of the things I'm looking for is I do want any and all maintenance and repair contracts for the dam between 2021 and 2024 in those financial statements. That will give us a chance to, again, look at those contracts, see if they were cost plus, see if maybe they're fixed fee. I mean, there's a possibility that these were fixed fee and that $3 million was gone before terra firma even started working. They did all of this at cost. Do I think that's what happened? And no, I don't, but it's possible. So I just want to be fair, and we'll update as we get the information. So I do want to see the engineering contract. I want to see the terra firma contract. I want to see any maintenance and repair invoices. So this is what we're charging versus any maintenance and repair payments. This is what we're paying out. Did we actually question those invoices, or did we just pay out whatever showed up? Are those invoices up to standards? Does it show the hours that we're working? Does it show the personnel? Does it show the material, or is it just a bottom line number? We'll see. We'll see. I want to see that reimbursement. I want to see the invoice, and I want to see any payments made to the contractor. The one thing that I forgot to mention is that when we were looking at that 12 and 19,000, they didn't delineate if that was all legal fee, all fine, or a combination of legal fee and fine. Because it was a round number, I kind of think that was just a fine, and they didn't even include whatever money was spent on the lawyers to get to that point, because it did say they recouped the legal fees for that contractor. So other things I want to see, I do want to see that RFQ request for quote, also sometimes called a request for price. There's several different things, but this is basically where you go out and say, hey, we have some work, tell us how much it's going to cost and give us a quote. So I do want to see that. I want to see the draft. That would be good. I would love to see the payments to the News Review or the other publications. I think that would be even better. Or if we could just get the dates of the supposed advertisement, we could probably go to the News Review and say, hey, can you pull this just so we can verify? I'm not saying that they didn't. Trust but verify. That should be the mindset as we look at this and as we go through an audit. So the other things that I wanted to look at is I did want to see any records of that reference to reimbursement payments for that contractor. I want to see what the discussion, the debate was in that meeting as to why they would do that, because maybe that would inform me and say, oh, no, this is all completely legitimate. So let's hear why. Let's hear the reasoning. And I believe, oh, so now what? So this is kind of, Betsy, where you can come in and talk about how folks could run for office or run for the special district. Or is there any questions before we move on to this? I'm sorry. Okay, all you, Betsy.
Great, thanks. So the reason that I had attended the in-person meeting and didn't get to talk about was primarily the idea of the second question: if you're dissatisfied with the current Winchester board past an ongoing decision, what options do I have? Because it's a public entity and it's a special district, you have everyone who lives in the district, as well as those who are members of the districts and don't live there, are able to vote for who is on the 9-member board. And 5 of those 9 seats are actually up for election. In Oregon, we have special district elections May and every odd number year. So there's a lot of special district elections going around in the county, but Winchester Water Control District is actually in the mix. And actually, if you look at the 5 out of 9, there's an ability to take over the board at this point because 5 is a majority, and that's usually how such things operate. Right now, it is the 17th, and if you want to run for that special district or any special district, you must file by March 20th. So you got 3 days. So you can do it, go to county clerk and you can do it. They can help you do it. They should help you do it. And it can cost you $10, and that's all it can cost you. You can also don't have to spend much money. If you're a Democrat, you can always get election help. I happen to be the chair of the candidate recruitment and support committee for the party. And so any kind of information you want to know about campaigning, but these seats don't usually cost a lot of money, and they also don't cost a whole lot of time. You just get to you need to make sure you talk to all the voters in your district. Now, if you don't make that deadline, you can actually win by a write-in election. And again, the county clerk's office, or you can contact the Democratic Party, find out more about write-in elections if it comes to it. As I looked at the website for the county clerk today, I noticed that there is still one of the seats somebody has not applied for re-election to their seat. And so there's already 4 of the 5 that have people that are already on the board file to be on the board again. But that is really where the ability to change what is happening at the Winchester Water Control District. They are, and again, because they're a public entity, they also have you have rights and responsibilities on that board that one may not have if they were on, a quasi-governmental entity board or a nonprofit board. And as I said earlier, I was very concerned to see what appeared to me as a lack of understanding of the Winchester Water Control District being a special district, a public entity, and therefore the obligations that that board had to the people. In the past, I know people have complained to me. They've been able to identify when their meetings are as part of the public meetings law, which is public records and meetings law is referred to. They have to have public meetings to do all their business transactions. There are some exemptions under the law that they can have executive session, but it's like with the public records law, they have to comply with that, and there may be some exceptions, and we will see, and including communication between the board members. So if you decide to run, it's really good to understand what your obligations are. There are professional associations for water control districts, and if anybody is interested, there will be a link to some information that we already shared to members of the district when folks did canvassing about how to apply water control districts, and links to find out more information about the obligation. But if you have any consideration of running and you see this within the next 2 days, you could do something now. And I don't know, I think I've probably covered mostly on the public records. You have any questions, something I didn't cover? Other than if you're not a Democrat, we really will explain the process to you. Whether you would get some direct help from the party would have to be determining whether we actually voted to endorse someone that is not a registered Democrat. If you're a registered Democrat, we would provide you assistance, period. So other than that, did I cover it all?
I think you got it. I think you
All right.
got it. So very good. So if there's a desire for another meeting, we can always do another meeting. As people watch this, you can reach out to the office, and then we can set that up. So now we've made it to the backup and kind of where the engineering assessment starts. I think I'm going to continue on just so we have the recording. You guys can stay on or not, but I'm just going to keep on going so it's done. But before I do that, I just want to open it up. Is there any questions? Jenny, Avon, Betsy?
No question. And this is being recorded, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We can edit though, as needed if we don't want certain things included.
I'll send an email.
Okay, very good. Okay. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm just gonna press on to go over some of the engineering questions as we go. So this is my resume. I'm gonna leave it as attached to this, just so folks can see why I think I'm able to make some of these determinations. So as we go through the engineering section, the one thing that I want to make completely clear is that I didn't find any fault necessarily with any of the engineering firms. In fact, the assumptions that I gathered, I was able to gather because they clearly lay out that this is an assumption that we're making in order to make some calculations. It's really incumbent on the state or the regulators at that point to look at the engineering and ensure that it is viable, and that those assumptions aren't something that's going to lessen the safety factor on the dam. So I just want to generally state that anything that we see in here, as far as the engineering, I find fault more with the state for not asking the question, and they may have asked the questions, right? And we just haven't seen that data. So this is just really questions that I would ask if I was in that position and saw some of this stuff. So the first thing we'll talk about here, this is just an email that Dow sent, where they were saying basically that the reason they weren't able to test or is because they were rewatering. If we refer to the front of the presentation, there was a very lengthy paragraph that the board put in there that said the reason why they couldn't do it is because the engineering didn't have the tooling and the tooling didn't work, and then you couldn't pool because there was nothing to anchor against. But very clearly in this report, they said it's because they ran out of schedule time. So interesting. So some of the assumptions that we see as we go through here, and I'm just going to paraphrase, is that they made two really big assumptions, in my opinion, about the dam design. And we're going to do a little jumping around. If you don't mind, we're going to reference this back and forth. So in the slide we were talking about, they say that this liner that was installed right here, this black line, the water's coming through here. It used to hit the rocks, which was semi-permeable, I'll say, and then the water would kind of flow through there and you'd have these false flows. So they put this liner down to kind of act as a sealant, stop the water from going through. But then they made this assumption that the liner has no effect on the forces of the water on the dam. Now, if you've ever stood in the river, and held anything that was wide and long, the force of the river is immense and immensely, it immediately starts pushing against you. So, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe there's something there I don't understand, which is always a possibility. But to say that lining had no effect, that's an assumption I would challenge. It also said that even if there's holes in this liner, doesn't really matter, because any water that gets through here is going to end up in these rocks, and that liner is going to push down so hard that it's basically going to squeeze it like a sponge and squeeze all the water out of it. Well, now we have assumptions that kind of go against each other, right? The first assumption says that it has no effect, and the second assumption says that it has such an effect that it's going to squeeze all the water out like a sponge. Those seem like competing assumptions and something I would have challenged. Also, and we'll refer back to it, but since I'm on the slide, I'm going to go ahead and talk about it. The top row of anchors right here, where it says 630, this is your top row of anchors. None of those were ever actually proof tested, not a single one of them. Whenever they did the original test, they tested along the bottom. They only tested, I think, 2 in the first tranche, and that's when Dow said absolutely not. This is not an approved design. So they worked with Strata, and they went back and they ended up testing 20 or 22 total, but none of those were on the top. Not a single one was on the top. So there's an assumption that they're making that the top row will perform identically to the bottom row. Now, Why I have problems with that assumption is for two main reasons. Number one, the length of the fill that this anchor has to go through is dramatically longer than the length of the fill that this has to go through. Does that have an impact? I have no idea. But but it's something that needs to be considered, right? It's not the same. So why would you say it's the same? I don't know if these angles in the drawing, the angles seem to be identical. So they're entering the bedrock at the same angle. I don't know that. I don't know if it actually came at a steeper angle or if it came at a more shallow angle. Either one of those would have an effect on the footing and how it holds. Also, if this liner is now taking a ton of pressure and pushing this way, now you have loads that are pulling, yes, 630 in, but you also have a load pushing down against it, almost trying to bend that rod. Again, all of these things are not 100%. These are just assumptions, and they're assumptions that I would challenge because they just don't seem to make a lot of sense to me. That was very technical. Any questions on what I just explained? I want to make sure it's understood. Okay, so here's the scary part about that too, is that all three of those assumptions are needed to come up with the safety factor of this dam. So if an assumption is an unknown, you can say that in mathematics, an assumption is a variable. And it is damn near impossible to solve any equation to any real endpoint that has three variables. And I think we all understand that just intuitively. And that's why, in my opinion, this is pretty high risk because of all those different assumptions. So moving back up, any questions about what I just talked about? Okay, very good. So as we go through this engineering report, there's another thing that really caught my eye, and it's that this liner, number one, was supposed to stop the water from protruding into the dam, but it doesn't seem to be working. And number two, this picture was meant to show how they were doing the pool test, but look at how much water is coming from underneath the footer. It's coming underneath the dam, hitting that footer, it appears to me, and then coming up over. Now, again, I didn't do the engineering on this. There's probably lots of data that I'm missing, but from my experience, that would be something I would say, hey guys and gals, why is there so much water pouring out of here? And if you've ever walked on the river's edge anywhere along the North Umpqua, as soon as that rock gets just a tiny bit wet, it becomes a skating rink. So in my limited knowledge, if that water is seeping down through the dam, hitting bedrock, and then sliding across the bottom, it could be acting as a lubricant, actually making it more possible that dam could shift, which is kind of scary. I don't want to say scary. I don't want to overdo it, but there's certain calculations that are made. And if you read through attachment A and B and all this stuff over here on the right, it really talks about those calculations, but those calculations are based on those assumptions. So I'll leave it at that. So top row of anchors, this is just the proof of what I talked about earlier. The top row of anchors, they were never tested. There's a number of reasons for that, and one of them being that the environment just doesn't allow for it. Go ahead, was there a question? Okay, very good. And then in the second paragraph, this just talks about some of the other testing they're going to need to do because work instructions weren't followed. So just more references up to the top of how terra firma didn't necessarily do all of the things that they maybe should have. So this is other assumptions and questions. This is kind of where I was talking about the safety loads in those assumptions. Now, they talk about an FS factor here. And what the FS factor is, it's a safety rating. I don't know exactly what it equates to, but as the number gets higher, obviously it gets more safe. In the first report, we'll see that it talks about, and this is from November, so the first one was earlier that year. It says specifically that the dam has a safety factor of 10. Great. So then the next report comes out and they analyze some of the things that happened, and they say, okay, well, now it's well in excess of 5. And then from September to November, they do some more digging, and suddenly it's all the way down to a safety factor of 3. Now, I don't know what the cutoff point is for a safety factor, but from 10 to 3 is a measurable drop, right? Maybe it means something, maybe it doesn't. Again, it's just one of those like questions of, oh, what's going on here? So some of the things, if I was the integrator or if I was a systems engineer on this particular project that I wanted to look at and see exactly what they were thinking or get in their mindset as they were doing these calculations and engineering, is I would want to look at their master assumption list. A master assumption list is just what it is. You take all your assumptions and you just list them out all the way down. And then as Ted makes an assumption, he adds it, and as Brenda makes an assumption, you add that. And then at some point, everybody gets together and they look at these assumptions and they say, is this assumption true? If not, then we need to make it either a risk or an opportunity. I would also want to see those risk issues and opportunities as they move forward. So, and an issue, just don't let that language confuse you. A risk is something before it happens. An issue means it happens, and now we have to deal with it. So we already talked about this, but I want to refer back to this drawing one more time, that again, if there's water getting through this liner and flowing through these rocks and hitting this bedrock and then skirting across this bottom, hitting that footer and then coming up over the top, I mean, that's water flowing through a dam and through the bottom, which, would cause erosion over time. So sinkhole, water underneath the power point, and voids in the dam. all good stuff. In 2020, there was a sinkhole that was noticed on the right south side of the dam, about 100 yards from where it was. It grew in size over time, and it grew in size even though there was efforts made to stop the flow. Kind of think that's maybe where the concrete leak came from, that the contractor, got sued for earlier, but just throwing concrete down the hole trying to fill it. But I don't know that. That's conjecture. So, take that for what it is. But the sinkhole is there, and it's growing in size. And in 2020 and 2021, they didn't necessarily know where the water was going. In 2022, 2023, they start to notice water flowing underneath the powerhouse and underneath the gate structure. Again, we don't know for sure, but using a little bit of common sense, big sinkhole expanding on the bank, water flowing underneath the structure in the dam. I'm just going to make an assumption, again, that we talked about assumptions, but the water may be flowing into that sinkhole underground, underneath the powerhouse, underneath the gate structure, and just eroding and then flowing back into the river. And if that's happening, there is a risk of completely undermining the structure, and the structures could fall backwards, forwards into the river. I don't know, but there is, if there's water flowing underneath the structure's foundation, that causes issues, of course. And on the right side, on the 2023, I do want to point out that Dow did note that there are voids in the dam, and a void being defined as you have your fill structure behind the cribbage, and there's a spot in there where there's no rocks, there's no fill material. It's just a void. Maybe there's water in there, maybe there's not. There was an attempt to fill some of these voids with foam. It didn't work for whatever reason. The state decided not to use it anymore. But what's important is that those voids over time, especially with water flowing through the dam, will collapse eventually on themselves. Will that destroy the dam? No, most likely not. It'll just make a little, indent on the top where that collapses on itself. But if enough of them collapse, then it could become a real problem. But I just want to recap. You have the sinkhole on one side with water flowing underneath the abutment on that side and the powerhouse and the gate structure. You have voids all over in the dam. You have a cribbing steel structure that hasn't truly been tested, at least the top row, and then a requirement to put a level on that steel structure just to make sure that the dam's not starting to tilt. Again, I am not I'm not a part of this project, and I wasn't privy to much of the data, but the data that we see does tell a story. So, yeah, interesting stuff. So this is more of the inspection reports. This is the reports that we got from the state whenever they would do their inspections on the dam. Again, none of this is going to be new information. It basically just talks about how they didn't do the testing of the tieback anchors properly, and they had to be redone. Excuse me. So in 2024, apparently in that sinkhole, someone threw a camera down there to do an inspection. It is also going to be a requirement to start doing that. And for whatever reason, they haven't sent the footage back yet. I know, Jenny, if you're still on, I know you looked at this specifically. Do you have anything you want to say here? Okay, not saying anything. Go to the next slide. This one, I apologize. I should have gave a warning. The next slide is only there because I've heard several people say that none of the fish are being damaged, nothing's being hurt, they're not jumping into the dam, they're not causing any damage, and I think they are. There's always an argument that could be made that this was done by a sill or by a rock or by whatever else. But these all look like really fresh blooms, and they're going through the fish ladder. I can say up whenever I fish above the dam, steelhead fishing, and just anecdotally talking to some of the guides there, I would say more than 50% of the fish have this all over their face. And it's suspected by some that that's them, false flow going up, trying to get through the dam, and just tearing up their faces. So it's pretty sad. It is what it is. Again, just to be fully open kimono, we can't say 100% that these fish injured themselves because of the dam, but I think it's safe to maybe make that assumption. This is a little superfluous, just a little extra. This is just the email that Dow sent, where they were saying that they weren't real happy with kind of what Terra Firma and Strata was doing, and that they were no longer going to support them or do any analyzation of what they were doing. They were just going to have to do it themselves. So, yeah, interesting stuff. And I think that is the end of the presentation. Any questions or comments before we close, or anything we need to do for the recording, Betsy, before we close?
Well, I think it's, sorry I was late. I didn't hear the intro about what we covered, but I assume you did one. And
yeah, a little bit, but if you want to do it real fast, we'll have the ability to edit, so we can just edit in that beforehand.
Well, I just want to make sure that people, recognize that, for one, this effort came about because we had been looking at the problems. We did take a resolution position in 2023, but ultimately, when we convened an ad hoc committee at the end of 2024, we decided to, find out more about what the members of the district, what their concerns were, what their issues were. And I think that, our earnest belief was that if we could find some common ground, this would make a whole lot easier to do. And so, we developed some outreach stuff, and some of you, went out canvassing and talked to people or left information. We left information about the stuff that I said about public meetings. It's a public entity, and the election coming up, and did that a couple of times, and then decided to have this public meeting that was arranged near where the folks live so we could get participation. And then it was taken over by some people on the board.
Yep.
And so this is an outgrowth of that. And then the effort that we reached out to try to have this a private meeting, online meeting, that didn't happen. So, this is information. And our intent was also to always share that information to the broader public, because our position is that, the public has the right to know what's happening with a public entity like Winchester Water Control District. We don't have to live in there. We don't have to live in the district. We don't have to vote, but you're still the stewards of public funds that we all benefit from. And so, bad government, if that's what it is, needs to have, the oversight, maybe of people out of the district. But it's not necessarily to pick on people at the district, but I think that it's a fair assumption from my, the stuff that I've done around public meetings and records law over the years, that it looks like that there's stuff that is not real clear, and there's a lot of information that happens that maybe the members of the district don't know about or didn't know about before.
Right. Agreed. And then Jenny, I see you came off mute. Did you have something to add?
I just wanted to thank Betsy for her excellent summary of how we got here. And of course, I didn't know that Saturday didn't happen, but
Yeah.
regardless, that was an excellent summary of why this was created in the first place.
Very good. Thank you. So I think that's it. Betsy, I'm gonna try to figure out how to extrapolate this recording. I did hit start recording before I started the meeting. So, and it says it's recording to my computer. I just don't know where. So I'll figure that out. I'm sure it's on the app. And then
All right.
I'll take that and I'll put it in a document on our shared drive somewhere so we all have access to it.
Yeah, and I want the recording because I want to put it up on YouTube, because I
Yep.
already started to look in there to do that.
Perfect. Yep. Sure
All
thing.
right.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good
No
night.
problem. Good night.